from the beginning, we had a very stringent hiring process. And so the first thing that we do is when we receive a resume from someone, we send them a list of short answer questions. One question might be, you're in a class of 8 to 10 elementary school students learning English. What is most important in that situation? And the last question is almost always, how do you want to improve yourself professionally? 3/4 of people don't even bother to respond. They don't want to put in the time.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Inside Japan podcast, which is sponsored by JobsinJapan.com, the best place on the internet to find your next job in Japan. On this episode, I'm speaking with Ryan, who's the owner of My English School in Yamagata, and he's lived in Japan for over 20 years. In this episode, we talk about the JET program, teaching at universities, starting a popular school, and hiring teachers who want to stick it out in the Inaka of Japan. I hope you enjoyed this conversation, and if you do, please share it with a friend and give us a 5-star rating on iTunes. Enjoy the conversation. Ryan, thank you so much for coming on the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to talk with you because you've lived in Japan for a long time, and you've lived most of it out in rural Japan. And I think a lot of people, they come to Japan, maybe they're on the JET program or they're teaching in an eikaiwa like I was, and you're in the countryside for a little while, but then they start moving to big cities. And so I really want to ask you, what is it about the countryside of Japan that you love, and why have you stayed there for so long? And what are some things that people should really be looking for in the countryside that maybe they don't realize they're missing?
Well, a lot of things that are nice about the countryside. For one, just the amount of space. I remember when I first came to Japan, the impression, the image I had in my head of Japan was Tokyo, that there were just tall buildings everywhere. And I get out to Yamagata and it's just green. I mean, there's mountains, there's the fields, and there's just all this space. And I'm from Oregon, and it just felt a lot more like I was in Oregon to me in a lot of ways. And so being in rural areas, maybe you don't have the dance clubs and so forth at night, but what you do have is you get to know the people a lot better. When you break into the community, you're really a part of the community here. And just the cost of living is so much lower.
Yeah. I mean, that's such an important one, the being part of the community, because I think a lot of people do feel rightly or wrongly, they do feel excluded in parts of Japan. And I think a lot of that in Tokyo, I'm not sure if it's, people thinking because they're foreigners. I think it's really more just because people in Tokyo don't have time to go out very often. A lot of Japanese people that we wouldn't really feel this necessarily, being foreigners, having way less requirements on us at work, but a lot of Japanese people are working all the time. And when they do have time off, that's why you get those sort of messages when you're like, hey, let's hang out. And they're like, yes, I'm free on the 4th of July from 11 till 2 p.m. And I'm like, that's in 4 months time or 5 months time, planning all the way far ahead. But in the countryside, I think you have a lot more, a slower pace, and you actually do get to make those really close connections.
Yeah, I mean, you definitely get invited out to different places. Now, there are definitely those who are standoffish. You take longer to get used to you. I mean, they take longer to get used to people just in general, not just foreigners, but being foreign does put an extra barrier in there. To a point. Although one thing I find is that I actually have more people when I go to Osaka, when I go to Tokyo, just coming up and randomly talking to me in English and kind of treating me as the foreigner, almost more so than I do out here, maybe because here they don't have as many tourists. There aren't as many people who look like me. And so I just don't have that as often. That's kind of refreshing. When I go to Tokyo and when I go to Osaka, part of me is almost like, oh, here I go again. How many people are going to just come up to me and start talking in English?
Yeah. And I wonder, does that have something to do with maybe they're just excited because they don't always have that many opportunities to talk to foreigners, and they're excited to use all the English that they've been learning? I think that's usually the case. I
think that's often the case. And it's also often the case that they're trying to be helpful. Like if I'm at a hotel and the staff just start talking to me in English, they're trying to be helpful.
Yeah.
And so, but and so it's a bit difficult for me because I've been here 23 years, and sometimes I just want to be here.
Yeah.
You know, and I have to remind myself, okay, they're trying to be helpful. They see me and they assume that I don't speak Japanese, and so they're trying to treat me in a way. They're trying to reach out to me in what they assume my language is. But sometimes it's nice to be in Yamagata and just have people talk to me in Japanese.
Yeah. So how did you get your start here then? So you came here 23 years ago, as you said. Were you out in Yamagata when you first came here? And what was the story behind that?
Yeah, I came on the JET program. And
Ah.
so it would have been 1998. And, the JET program said you're going to Yamagata. And in those days, there was internet in my dorm room at the university, but I wasn't at my university when I got the notice at that time. And I was actually at a relative's house. And so I actually pulled out a book atlas of Japan trying to find Yamagata where it was. It's like, there it is. And so I had requested a rural area. I did not want to be in Tokyo. I did not want to be in Osaka. Too many people. So I requested a rural area. I had no idea where Yamagata was. Got out here, and I've been in Yamagata now 23 years.
Wow. I had a similar thing when I came to Japan that I didn't find out where I was going to be placed until I think it was 3 weeks before.
Okay.
So I'd already booked my flight because we had training at a certain time. And so the flight was to go into Nagoya, and we had our training in Nagoya. And then we were all sort of shipped out across Japan to our different locations. And I was really lucky that one person from my training who I've been friends with for 10 years, that we were in the same region. But region is a sort of very broad word because we were both in Fukuoka, but Fukuoka's pretty large. We were quite far away from each other, and I was way out in the middle of nowhere. I'm talking rice paddies and forests and not very much to do.
And your friend was in the middle of Fukuoka City, or?
No, my friend was in a different city, but it wasn't Fukuoka City. But I had a lot of people in my company in Fukuoka City, but that was more than an hour and a half away by train. So basically I was out in the middle of nowhere with nobody, and I couldn't get a phone contract because when I went to get my phone contract, they were like, we're not sure if you would just like get the contract and then just take the phone and leave, because those were the days when it was a little bit more difficult for foreigners to get cell phone contracts. So it was very difficult to start off with. But it's funny because I'm still in touch with a few people from there. Whereas, I lived in Nagoya for twice as long, and I haven't got that much contact with people from Nagoya anymore. It's funny. You make these really good connections with people out in the countryside that maybe it's a little bit harder to do in bigger cities.
Well, I'm actually this next week, I'm going to be in Tokyo, and one of the people I'm meeting is a person that I taught when she was a junior high school student.
Wow.
And we're just going to have some dinner together. But yeah, those connections, they can last a long time.
Yeah, that's fantastic. So I'm wondering, after you did the JET program, was there sort of a normal path for you where you sort of taught usually JETs are in junior high schools or high schools in Japan, and then you just moved on, or like what happened?
Yeah, well, originally I came thinking 2, maybe 3 years. And then
I've heard that before.
And at the end of that, I was like, my Japanese is really starting to come along. If I leave now, it's going to be just to that point where I was getting good, and then it's going to drop back down. So I decided to stay a little bit longer, but that time JET was limited to 3 years. You couldn't do a 4th or 5th year like you can now.
I think it's still limited to 3 years.
Well, you can apply to do a 4th and 5th year.
Oh, okay. All right.
And that wasn't even an option for when I was on JET. And so I wanted to stay, but I wanted to do a little bit more than just ALT work. So I decided, I found a private high school in Yamagata City that they had been with the JET program. They had decided to go direct hire. And I told them, hey, I want to go, but I don't want to just be an ALT. I want to actually be teaching in the classroom myself, which, looking back on it now, I have teaching degrees now. At that time, I didn't have a teaching degree. So it was probably a little bit arrogant of me. But, that's what I wanted to do. And they took me on as what they call a joking koshi.
Gyokin Koshi. Okay, what's that?
Gyokin Koshi, which is it's when you're a full-time lecturer at the high school, but you're on a yearly contract. And so because of that, I was on the standard. So the jet pay at that time was 300,000 yen a month. And I went down to 210,000 yen a month, but with 4 months of bonus.
Ah, okay.
So my actual average monthly pay went down a little bit to, I think, about 280,000 yen a month.
Okay.
But it's those bonuses. Once you work in that 4.5 months of bonus or something like that. And I had to be on the committees. I was a fukutanin, which is a sub homeroom teacher.
Oh, wow.
And so when one of the homeroom teachers was gone, I was doing the morning meeting, afternoon meeting, signing kids out, doing essentially by the time I left there, most of the responsibilities that the other Japanese teachers were doing. Also took students on their school trip to Korea, for example. So I took on a full role.
That's incredible. And I think it's kind of like a layer of trust that they must have had in you to do that kind of thing. Because usually I think part of the reason why many foreign teachers are ALTs is because they don't quite trust someone, and probably rightly so, because many of them are just hired directly from university with no teaching background, and they don't want to trust them with an entire classroom when those kids, they're going to be representatives of the school, going towards university examinations and things like that. So being able to do things like homeroom and being able to have those responsibilities must have been, I don't know, it seems like quite an honor in a sense, that they would give you that kind of responsibility.
Yeah, I think it was. And I'm not sure, I can't tell you what it was about my situation that allowed me to move into that kind of spot. Being at a private high school made it possible to tap into the public high school. But also it just happened to be the people at that school were really good. And over time allowed me to take on those responsibilities.
What was your favorite thing about teaching at that private high school?
Wow, that would be... I liked teaching my own classes, and I really liked the students. It was a relatively low level high school. Most of the classes I taught were in the culinary course. And these students, it's one of the few places in Japan you can get a culinary license in high school.
Interesting.
Wow. Almost everywhere else, you have to graduate high school and then go to, a Senmon Gakko, which is like a trade school.
Right.
But they could actually do it. But it also meant that these kids, they were not really that interested in English. They wanted to be cooks. And so I had 40, sometimes 44, 45 students in a class of they wanted to be cooks. But what that also meant is it gave a lot of freedom, because there was not a pressure to get these kids to pass some kind of future English exam. They just wanted to have fun. And it was a great opportunity to get to meet some wonderful students who, were not under a whole lot of pressure, academic pressure. They just wanted to go out and open the restaurants. And I actually know some of them now. What was it? I want to say a month and a half ago, I was at a 100 yen shop, and a guy came up to me, he goes, hey, Grando Sensei. And I'm like, what? I don't remember him. I'm sorry. I had no idea who he was. Like, and he goes, yeah, from Gakuin High School. Yeah, you were my teacher. And I was like, and he goes, and I've opened my restaurant down the street. Can you come?
Wow.
And so he's got probably one of the best yakiniku restaurants I've ever eaten at.
Oh, wow. That's incredible.
Really, really good. And there's at least 2 or 3 or more restaurants I know in Yamagata City and around that are run by former students.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing with being in Japan for 23 years is that, a lot of the students that you taught, they grow up and they have careers and they have lives. I wonder sometimes, because I'm not really in touch with students that I had back in my first few years in Japan, but I taught, elementary school kids, I taught junior high school kids. Like the junior high school kids, that was my second year in Japan. That was 8 years ago. Like those kids have got to be in their 20s now,
Yeah.
and I, it makes me wonder what they're doing and where they are, and it'd be very very if one of them taps me on the shoulder in a daiso or something, that would be that would be amazing. I'd love that. So after you taught at the private high school, I remember you talking beforehand, before this podcast began, that you said that you taught at Yamagata University.
Oh.
So what is it like teaching at a rural university? Because I'm sure a lot of students, they probably want to move to a city or something, like wherever they're from. They want to go to a big city where there's lots of stuff going on. They want to go to Waseda or, a popular, famous university in the city. What kind of students end up going to a university in the countryside, and how was it to teach them?
Well, to be honest, I'm not sure if the students were all that different. I taught it 3 different courses there. I mean, they were all English. I was teaching English, but in 3 different departments. And one was engineering, another was just sciences, and the other was the medical school. And Yamagata University is the only national university in Yamagata Prefecture. So right there, you already have some fairly high-level students coming in. Also, teaching at the medical school, Yamagata University's medical school is relatively high level. I mean, it's not at the highest level, but decently high enough that 90% of the students were not from Yamagata.
Okay, so it's reasonably competitive.
It's a reasonably competitive school, and it would be for a lot of the students that wanted to go to a decent university, but they didn't want to have to pay for the high costs of the private universities in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm.
So the students in the medical school were essentially I think the same students you would have in Tokyo or in Osaka or anywhere else. They were just the students that, happened, maybe they couldn't quite get into their favorite school. So they came to Yamagata in order to go to a good school.
Mm. How are you able to teach in so many broad departments? Because that's kind of unusual, isn't it? That you could teach in engineering and also in the medical school. Was it English specific classes or
That's exactly what it was. Officially, I was in the Jinbun Gakubu, which I guess would be humanities would be the best. What would be the translation for it? I'd have to look that up. Again, my apologies. But what happens is a lot of the other departments would have just their first year students at the main campus.
Mm-hmm.
And then the engineering students would go to Yonezawa, and the medical students would go to the southern part of Yamagata City, and so forth. So those departments would not have their own English faculty. They would borrow the faculty from the Jinbun Gakubu, is how I ended up teaching all of those. So I was officially Jinbun Gakubu, but I never actually taught a single Jinbun Gakubu student in the 90s I was teaching there.
I see. Interesting. So so what did you do after you were teaching at that university? Was that something that you wanted to stick at for a long time, or how did that kind of lead into what you're doing now, which is owning a school?
It didn't lead into what I was doing now. I actually started teaching at the university after starting the school. So what I did, the reason I left the private high school is, while I was at the private high school, I did the University of Birmingham MA and TEFL TESOL.
Okay.
I had decided, if I'm going to be teaching, then I'd better be professional and do something, get an MA or something like that. And I still wasn't sure what I wanted to do, but I knew I needed more.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I just didn't want to rely on just experience. And after that experience there, I realized, even though the private high school suggested I take their employment exam to become full tenured. Well, tenure, I mean, in a high school situation, it's different from me when I'm saying but full employee.
Like an unlimited contract or something.
Unlimited contract. Thank you. That's exactly what it was. And I decided that that's just not what I wanted to do.
Mm-hmm.
And the MA was great, was very, very challenging for me and very good in learning about language acquisition. Mm-hmm. But there was no observation whatsoever. And even at the private high school, I think the principal came to the first class I taught and probably saw, he's not completely awful. And no one ever can watch me teach again. for 5 years.
Yeah, I think as long as the students are coming out of the classroom and they're not like, telling their parents that the teacher was, slapping kids or something, or
Oh yeah, it's
I
just
think they're just like, okay, just let them get on with it, which I think, I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that we could talk about that, but I don't think that's the best way of doing things.
no. And I definitely, and that experience has played a role in how I set up the school. But after that, it was, I wanted more. I wanted some feedback. So I went back to Oregon for a year and a half and got my Master's of Arts in Teaching and Oregon State Teaching Certification. So I'm a certified teacher in junior high school in the state of Oregon as well, which I kept current. But that allowed me to get that student teaching. And in Japan, they only have between 2 and 4 weeks of student teaching before they get their license. But in Oregon, you're required to have a minimum of 700 hours. In my university, they had 1,000 hours.
Wow, that's a lot.
So I did a lot of student teaching, crammed that into the year. And then from there, my thought was I either want to work at an international school, but Tohoku really only has one international school. It's in Sendai.
Yeah.
Or I wanted to have my own school, but I wasn't sure about starting my own. Right about that time, a person was who ran a school, a one location school in the same town, Higashine in Yamagata, where I had built my house before going for my MAT. Made sure to build the house before quitting my job so I could get the loan. He wanted to sell. And so came back here and took that school, but also wanted to do a little bit more, wanted to try teaching in the university. And also because Yamagata University is the only national university in Yamagata, saying, hey, the school owner teaches at Yamagata University. That's something I wanted to be able to use. And so for the 9 years I was at Yamagata University, I was teaching Mondays, 3 classes Mondays at Yamagata University at Yamadai. I'll just call it Yamadai from here on out. But I would teach those 3 90-minute classes at Yamadai on Monday, and then Tuesday through Saturday was doing the school.
Wow, that sounds like a pretty tough schedule as well. If you've got a lot to think about, you've also got to prep all of your classes. Like for the university, you've got to do marking. That's not a small thing to keep going for several years. So what was the point at which you thought, okay, well, I've got this school and the school's doing pretty well, so I'm going to quit the university job and build it up from there? What was the sort of the pathway to that?
The pathway was after being there about 7 years. So the school had been going for about 7 years, and we had grown from 1 to, at that time, 5 or 6 locations.
Okay, wow.
And from 100 students when I took over to probably at that time, I would say about 700.
700 students. That's like you had your own little junior high school, like a big junior high school.
We have 1,200 now. So
wow, that's incredible. It's a lot of students.
But yeah, it was just getting too much. Yeah. And I wanted to go at that time. The school was getting big enough and the resources enough that I could say go to Fukuoka for a conference or Kobe for a conference. And trying to get back from Fukuoka or Kobe, because the conferences finish on Sunday. Sometimes go into early in the Monday morning, but usually they finish on Sunday. But in order to get back to Yamagata in time for a 10:30 lesson.
Oh, wow. You have to like take an overnight flight or something.
An overnight flight, or if it's Osaka, I could catch the first plane out of Osaka Airport at 7 a.m., arrive at 8:10 at Yamagata Airport, drive down to Yamagata University and start teaching at 10:30.
Yeah, it's kind of riding the line a little bit.
Yeah, Fukuoka, someplace like that where there's no direct flight, I just couldn't make it. Yeah. And so it's just told them, I can only do 1 class. And then I just told Yamadai, it's been great, thank you very much, but I just don't have time for this.
Okay, so tell me a little bit more about your school then, because what I want to know mostly, and I think what most people are more interested in know, is how was it able to grow so much from 100 students to now 1,200 students, which is a lot. How were you able to do that, and how are you What are the sort of principles that guide your education and like hiring practices and things like that?
I think definitely there's a lot of luck. I started the school, or we took over the school. I didn't actually start it, took over the school at the right time. There were, and there were a lot of factors involved, but I think some things that I did that contributed were, number one, I worked really, really, really hard to speak Japanese. So I was able to talk to parents, talk to students right now, not in class. I was not doing the lessons in Japanese.
Right.
But I was able to make those connections with the community, make the connections with the parents. That was big. I also played up the fact that I had 2 master's degrees and teaching certification from the US. And so was able to say, hey, I'm a teacher. And one of the big things that we talk about at the school is that just because you're a native speaker of English, I want to be careful because not all of our teachers are native speakers.
Right, like a native level speaker.
Native level speaker, thank you very much. Just because you're a native level speaker of English does not mean you can teach.
Right.
Anymore until the Japanese parents, could you go in and teach a Kokugo class, a Japanese lesson at school? And they're like, no. And well, it's the same thing for English.
And it's very interesting that actually a lot of the non-native speakers, but native level speakers who are from the Philippines or Indonesia or a lot of Asian countries, their teaching ability is far and away better than the Americans who come over here and don't have any teaching qualifications, because they've worked really hard to learn the language themselves as a second language and also to get something like a CELTA or a TEFL qualification, so they actually know what they're doing when they actually get in the classroom. And I've seen this over and over again with teachers from Korea and from the Philippines that I've worked with before. Their teaching quality is so much better than other people I've worked with.
And I would say that you're not just people from other countries, but even Japanese, that a student is far better off being taught by a good Japanese teacher of English than they are by some American coming over who's getting a job simply because they happen to be from America.
Right. I mean, it's just... So how do you, when you grew your school, you were using those qualifications and teaching qualifications that you had. What happened when you started? Because you can't teach 1,200 kids by yourself, so you obviously got a lot of staff, and you advertise on our board on Jobs in Japan. So how do you go about hiring the right kind of teachers to actually that'll actually do a good job, so that you can continue having those students and you can continue helping them?
Yeah, so I'll go, because there's some other areas in the school that I think we do that are very important. But yeah, going on to the hiring side there, from the beginning, we had a very stringent hiring process. And so the first thing that we do is, when we receive a resume from someone, we send them a list of short answer questions. Usually, I think it's 3 questions now. It used to be 5, but we've played with the number a lot. And there are questions about, one question might be, what do you think is most, or you're in a class of 8 to 10 elementary school students learning English. What is most important in that situation? And the last question is almost always, how do you want to improve yourself professionally? 3/4 of people don't even bother to respond.
Wow. 3/4, my goodness.
Yeah, they don't want to put in the time.
Which is kind of a good barrier to put up, because then you only get the people, you only have to spend your time interviewing people who can at least be bothered to think of a good answer for 3 questions,
Oh yeah, and it saves us a lot of time. And of course, some people do respond. They'll respond with like 1 sentence, and those people as well, it's like,
right.
That's not it. And it also allows us to see too what kind of writing ability people have, because it's amazing how many people, even people from native speaker countries like America, really can't write their way out of a handbag.
Yeah.
So it's just, and so that's the first step. And then of course, if they make that step, we will tend to interview people. We wouldn't have sent them the questions if it wasn't someone we would have interviewed based on the resume.
Right. Okay,
And
so then I want to bring it back to the other part of the question that I asked you, which was which I kind of skipped over a little bit, but the question was about what kind of principles you have as a school that help you not only maintain those students, but do a really good job for them. Because I mean, it's difficult. A lot of schools start up and they don't really have anything unique about them that they're doing in terms of English, or they don't have anything that's really founded in some kind of useful pedagogy. It's just trying to get students for a class with a foreigner in the room.
Yeah, well, for us, the first step was to say, okay, how is it we teach? And we set ourselves on a constructivist language teaching philosophy, and we use a textbook series called Finding Out, which is very popular in Japan. There's many other series that that would work very well, but we said, and based on that, we set very strong guidelines. Now, I don't mean guidelines in the sense of set lesson plans. Like a lot of the national chains will try to teacher proof their lessons by doing a set lesson plan that anyone could teach this. And if anyone can teach it, it's not worthwhile. And
right, those cookie cutter lesson plans, I've had those before when I've been working in situations, and I've often found them very, very difficult to use with my teaching style. I've taught myself Montessori method when I was a kindergarten teacher. I've taught at international high schools and built my own curriculum from scratch. So getting this cookie cutter course for a summer program or something I'm teaching, they're often really terrible.
Right. Yeah, it doesn't work. And so we've got those guidelines. I think of it as kind of like the gutters on a bowling alley. You have to stay within that range, but where the ball goes within that, you've got a lot of freedom. And then we want to be careful. We wanted to treat the school as much like a school as possible. We never use the term eikaiwa.
Okay.
When we took it over, the previous owner called it My Eikaiwa, even though the official name, the business name is My English School, but he would call it My Eikaiwa. We call it My Ego School.
Okay.
Which makes a difference, I think. And some of the things that we do that are different, for example, most schools, they'll take students anytime. And quite frankly, as students, we're a business. We are very serious about education, but we're a business. We need money. We don't get funnels of money down from the national government like Yamagata does. And so we need the money. But elementary school students, we have an enrollment period from the beginning of April until the end of June. If they don't join by the end of June, and they're inexperienced students, if they have experience and they can pass pass like a little interview test, a level check, then we'll let them in. But if they have no experience and they come in July and they say, hey, we'd like to join My English School, we're like, thank you very much. Please give us your name. We will call you back in about December when the Setsumekai, the explanation meetings sessions have been set up for the next April academic year.
Yeah.
And I talked to other school owners. They're like, you turn away students? It's like, well, no, we're not turning them away. We're asking them to wait. And I'd say more than half of them wait. The remainder decide to go someplace else. But
I think that helps you in a way, because number one, it shows them we care enough about our education to make sure that we can actually achieve what we're saying we can achieve. And it also kind of gives them that sort of scarcity feeling where it's like, well, we can't just get in because I'm the one with the money and we're giving them money and we can make them do what we want, which I'm sure actually helps with, because I've had this issue a lot with private schools, is that you get these parents who think that because they've got their kid in the school and they're the parent in charge, that they can dictate terms of what you do in the English classroom, and we've had a lot of that before in schools that I've worked at. And I guess if you tell them these are our rules, this is how we do things, then you probably nip that in the bud pretty early.
Right. You have to set down your standards, and it doesn't mean that you never have any flexibility, but if you don't stick by your standards, then there's no point in having standards.
Yeah.
But what you talk about, parents getting their way because they're putting in the money. Just one little story I remember, would have been probably 6, 7 years ago. We had a mother who was going to enroll her daughter, and she was going to enroll her it was like May. So it was within our enrollment period, but it was halfway through May. And there were, I think, 5 lessons in May. And our policy is that if there's 4 lessons or more, you pay full price. And if you're coming partway through the month, you pay 25% for each lesson you take. So if you join halfway and there's 2 lessons left, then you pay half.
Okay.
And so this mother was like, but there's 5 lessons in May. If you charge me instead of half, if you charge me 40%, because it'd be, you're charging me 20% for each of the 5. If you charge me 40%, I'll join this month. But if you're going to make me pay 50%, I won't join until next month. And I was like, well, we look forward to you joining next month then.
That's a good way of telling people where things stand.
Yeah, it's just like, you have to have your policies, and, you be polite about it. But if the parents feel like they are dictating with their money, then you're going to have a lot of problems.
Yeah. You mentioned the specific kind of education that you have, like the before you mentioned the book, what was the type of education that you?
It's a constructivist approach to language.
So what does constructivism mean in terms of language learning? Just in a sort of brief way, just so that because I haven't heard that term used before, but I guess I've been teaching mostly at Montessori schools since I started learning that method, and teaching my own classes at the international high school. So what does that mean, and why is it good?
Yeah, I first learned about it from David Paul. I don't know if you're familiar with him.
I've heard the name. Does he do the ETJ thing?
He did the ETJ, correct. Yeah. And he is the author of the Finding Out textbooks we use. Okay. And so I'll try to do constructivism justice in a short period. But what I'd say is constructivism, comes from the idea of constructing things. And one idea would be that each of us has a version of English in our head that we've constructed over time. And your version of English is slightly different from mine. They're close enough that we're communicating fine. But every once in a while, I'm going to say something that doesn't match your idea of English.
Right. It wouldn't be the kind of word I would use or something. It would, yeah. Exactly.
Or the phrase, or a turn of a phrase or something like that. And then there'd be some a hiccup in our communication. And so where that comes is when teaching English, we can't really teach something and just put it into the kids' heads. It doesn't work that way. What's got to happen is those children need to have enough experiences in English, whether it's being told something, whether it's an interaction, where they are constructing their version of English in their head. And the more they have interaction, we'll say an example from Japanese. For those who are listening who know Japanese well, that O is a fairly common honorific in Japanese, ohashi. Right. The chopsticks. Hashi is chopsticks, but ohashi, the O is just honorable chopsticks, I guess, or I don't know. Right. And so I had it in my mind, so as I'm learning Japanese, I know, okay, O is an honorific. And I heard someone say one time, omae, which for those who don't know Japanese is not a very polite form.
Right.
But I heard "oh," so I thought, "Oh, it must be very polite." So I started using "omae" with people when I was trying and that's because I constructed this version of Japanese in my head. And of course, then I say "omae," and I look at the reaction. It's kind of that's not
what you think it means.
Yeah, that's not the reaction I'm expecting.
Yeah. I have a very similar example that I learned very early on was someone in my company had this problem where so if the same thing, so at the end of something means looks like. So oishi so is that looks nice, or omoshiro so, that looks interesting. But then I think a kid in his class, in front of the parent, she was trying to tie her shoelaces and she couldn't do it because she was 5 years old or something. She was struggling with it, and the guy said, kawaii so. And he didn't really, kawaii is cute. And he thought, so kawaii so means looks cute.
Right.
but it actually means like it's almost like it's a bad translation, but I think it translates more directly as like pathetic or like not not great. It's not a good connotation at all.
Yeah, I feel sorry for you.
Yeah, I feel sorry for you. Exactly. And the mother was really offended, and he had to go to their house and bow profusely and apologize to the parent for insulting her daughter, because apparently the girl had cried because because the teacher made fun of her not being able to tie up her shoelaces when he didn't even know that's what he was saying. So so you're right, it does, you do build up in your brain a kind of relation to the language that is based mostly on your experience, and that might not be exactly what it is for other people or for native speakers of the language.
And so our job as teachers in a constructivist approach to language teaching is setting up situations, as many situations as possible in an efficient way, so that the students are encountering through interaction the language and making guesses about what it means.
That's a really good way of doing it.
Yeah. And then, they learn by, when the reaction is what they expect, then it reinforces essentially the hypothesis they have about how English is working. And when it's not what they expect, it's like, oh, okay, I've got to go back to the drawing board.
That's fantastic. So I just realized we've been talking for quite a long time, and I've really enjoyed this conversation. So I've been like all of these questions coming to my head, but I want to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast. Where can people find out more if they're interested in My English School in Yamagata?
Yeah, if they're interested in teaching for us, the website for our school is myeigo.com. myeigo.com.
Right, and if anyone wants to find out about the jobs that you have, you often post them on JobsinJapan.com, so they can take a look on there as well. Right now, we essentially exclusively post on Jobs in Japan, and are very happy with and I'd say Peter Lackner, who runs it, really cares about education. Yeah, I agree. Awesome. Thank you so much, Ryan, for coming on the podcast. No, thank you very much, Charlie. I appreciate it.